So you're trying to avoid friendly fire and get to a point of sanctuary. You obviously saw them go across the spikes. Their tires get deflated, but they run flat, and they find safe haven. This happened virtually every hour of every day in Baghdad. And so for police officers like you and I, who were over there working, this was a constant, consistent, eternal threat. Now, on the other hand, the Iraqi army had small successes once in a while. This is one of their tank maneuvers, and they encountered a civilian vehicle, and somebody obviously could not find the brake handle. I don't know if Gary Shipp is still here. He might have a perspective on this about armor in general. But once in a while, we got things right or we got them wrong, depending on your perspective. Next slide, please. This is a typical Iraqi police station. Does not look like ours. They are fortified with defensive positions. Why is that? Because they are lucrative, soft, relatively soft targets for terrorist attacks. Next slide, please. The Iraqis did their duty in unarmored, standard, mostly Mitsubishi pickup trucks. Here's an interesting story, and one of those ironies of the war. Japan's contribution to the global war on terror in Iraq was to send over some 6,000 vehicles, which certainly changed the inventory of the Iraqi police, but they didn't send them any police repair manuals that were in Arabic. They're all in Japanese. So nobody could repair the vehicles, so they drove them till they broke down. They left them on the side of the road, and the country today is still littered with broken down Iraqi police vehicles. Next slide, please. Next. Next. This is a story that's reminiscent of the cultural divide that exists in Iraq, even within the government itself. Here's the backdrop. In November of 2004, insurgents had dominated a neighborhood in southwest Baghdad and had targeted a particular Iraqi police station to take control of it. They actually called the Iraqi police station commander. They said, "We're coming with 44 men in 11 vehicles in 3 minutes. Leave your weapons, your equipment, and all your communications for us. If you are there when we get there, we will kill everybody." They arrived exactly on time. They assaulted the compound using rocket-propelled grenades, breached the barriers around the perimeter, and then came inside. As it turns out, half of the 38 Iraqi police who had been there fled, some actually fleeing barefoot and leaving their shoes. You'll see one of those photographs in just a moment. 19 others of them staying there either because they were too slow to get out or they wanted to stand and fight. Every one of them was marched up the stairs to the roof and executed. So the insurgents dominated that police station, took everything out of it, and then left it and dared anyone else to assume control of it, leaving it as kind of a symbolic gesture of their power in that neighborhood. So 3 months later, we made the decision to go back and reclaim that station, not having to fight our way in, but symbolically trying to restore the United States control of that particular facility. I want to just walk you through what that place looked like because it was representative of what happened at so many Iraqi police facilities that were targeted. Oh, and here's an interesting irony. The commander of this station happened to be Sunni, and he called for assistance from the neighboring Iraqi police station that was less than 1 kilometer away, but that commander happened to be Shiite, and he wouldn't send any police reinforcements. Next slide. So this is the Iraqi police station. Next slide. You can see, if you look on the walls, you can see the RPG hits. You can see where the walls, where the perimeter was breached, and they actually were able to go inside. Next slide. As I said, people leaving more quickly than they even had time to don their shoes. Next slide. This is a typical police facility on its inside, and not particularly appealing aesthetically. Next. Next. This is the walkway up to the top of the building where the executions began. Next. This is the order of battle. If you were looking out as the insurgents approached, they came in by that. It's a main arterial in southwest Baghdad. This is not happening somewhere in a remote province of Iraq. This happened in urban metropolitan Baghdad. Next. 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 And in a final calling card about what they did there, they took a photograph of one of the Iraqi policemen whom they had killed, and they glued it to his official ID photo and left it as a calling card of their assault. Improvised explosive devices were an enormous threat. When I say that, I'm talking about people who either plant bombs in inconspicuous places or move them around and either continue to move them or leave them in an immobilized automobile. This is not high-tech stuff, not particularly sophisticated. Iraq is a country that is awash in munitions. The experts suggest that there are enough munitions left over there to extend the level of violence for another 10 years. We found explosive devices, artillery round, rocket shells in any place you can imagine, holding up people's coffee tables in their houses, propping up classroom desks in elementary schools, in sewer systems, as part of playground apparatus, you name it, there were artillery rounds left, and they used those against us. Next. 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 This is actually an early attempt by the Iraqi police EOD personnel to disarm a discovered improvised explosive device. Won't see a lot of robotics here, don't see any disruption by water cannon. This is hands-on work. When we first arrived in country, we actually watched EOD technicians defuse suspected munitions using their teeth and scissors. So that's the level we had to begin with when the training regimen began. Next, please. Next. 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 If you don't appreciate the nature of what one artillery round or its equivalent can do when it's hidden in a roadway or in a roadside place of concealment, this is what happens. Next, please. Next. 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 This was actually one of our convoys that was attacked about 6 blocks from our hotel. IED attack followed by a machine gun assault, a very standard method of battle in Baghdad. Yes, next, please. Next. 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 Civilian casualties were a continuous issue. Civilians always getting hurt, and probably in the long run calculus, there were more civilians injured and killed than there were targeted members of the Allied forces. Next, please. Next. Next. In an effort to give credit where credit is due, most of the Iraqi police, no matter how primitive their training, no matter how marginal or modest their job skills, when you called on them to engage, they tended to come and they engaged, maybe blindly and maybe unskilled, but typically they did come. Next. 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 Now, the enemy owned parts of the city, particularly in Sadr City, and they actually had their militia out controlling intersections, exercising checkpoints, searching vehicles. So you often had this standoff dimension where the good guys versus the bad guys came together at an intersection. And in very many ways, it was often like the Wild West and the showdown at high noon. Next. 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 How easy was it for them to attack us? This particular station wagon was discovered primarily because it was weighted down and sitting abandoned on a street. What we found in the rear seat was a 122 millimeter artillery round attached with detonation cord to the driver's seat and intended to be an improvised explosive device. It's very difficult to distinguish these kind of things when you find them in common circumstances. Next. This is the back seat where it had been torn out, nothing left but the foam and the metal structure, and it was in here that the explosive device was laid. Next. This is probably, to me, a profound picture. What you're looking at here, and I don't know if you can see the detail, this is an improvised explosive device. Strapped on the front of it with the yellow tape is a cellular telephone, and it is inserted into a hollowed out spot into a portion of cement curbing. Now, there is a sister piece of cement curbing that is hollowed out to marry up with this,